Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
And Laura in the studio.
And Henry at home.
Is it Mission Impossible for the Conservatives?
That's what we've been discussing this weekend. It depends how you count it. It depends who you are. If you're Mark Harper, who's a loyal ally of Rishi Sunak, you say it's all to play for. If you are Suella Braverman, former Home Secretary, you say on the telly, we might not have any MPs left if Rishi Sunak doesn't change course. And if you're Paul Scully, who's another former minister who was also on our programme, you say it's all looking pretty terrible and the party needs to take a breath, show some humility and stick to the centre. So it's not a very pretty set of realities, but there are differing realities, but not a very pretty set of realities for Rishi Sunak today.
So I offer from Radio 4 land today Gavin Barr, who was Theresa May's advisor. And of course, she saw a chance to go for an election and was then humbled by it, was then replaced as Prime Minister. He said the Conservatives are on course for a defeat, possibly a huge one. But he said Keir Starmer's not loved, hasn't necessarily got the Blair power. Henry, what's your verdict now that all the results are in, bar the couple of police and crime commissioners?
It's a terrible set of results for the Conservative Party. I think that's really, really clear. You know, Mark Harper obviously had one of the most difficult jobs in politics today, which is to spin a terrible set of results. And he said that he thinks that the results show there's all to play for. They just don't. I mean, it may well be that things change. Things can change. But these results do not show at all that things are changing in the public's perceptions of the Conservative Party. Vast quantities of the public want to give the Conservative Party a kicking. That is abundantly clear from the results. And, I think lots of political experts, psephologists, thought it was a bit odd that Conservative MPs were deriving kind of psychological comfort from a victory in the Tees Valley and what was expected to be a victory in the West Midlands when the broader outlook was so bad. They don't even have that cold comfort of the West Midlands anymore. And yet, as we could see from Suella Braverman today, the coup isn't happening. So that leaves Conservative Party in a very odd place where simultaneously lots of their MPs think that they have the evidence that they're doomed, but they don't want to change leader because many of them think that would make it worse.
I mean, they're stuck, aren't they? I mean, they are really, really stuck. That's the thing that I see a sense about the Conservative Party. They're stuck believing that they are on their way to what Commissar Melvin on Discord has called Starmergeddon.
Starmergeddon.
After a terrible week for the Tories.
It is a takeaway. We can say that Rishi Sunak will lead the Conservative Party into the next election.
It certainly would be weird at this stage. It would be really weird if he didn't. And I think in time, as I pompously wrote in a piece on the website, I think this weekend might see that this is sort of the moment their fate was sealed, if you like, because they've gone, actually, we're not up for the cup. We're not going to change the leader. Suella Braverman came on the telly this morning with a stinging broadside, people might say in journalese, at the Prime Minister, but also very clearly said we can't change the leader. But you've got people on the left of the Tory party saying the leader has to change how he is, what he does. You've got people on the right of the party saying the leader has to change, but he's still stuck too. He's stuck in the middle of that Tory coalition, that Boris Johnson coalition that was so broad, and it ain't really working for him.
The plan's not working. And I despair at these terrible results. There's no spinning these results. There's no disguising the fact that these have been terrible election results for the Conservatives. And they suggest that we are heading to a Labour government. And that fills me with horror. I love my country. I care about my party. And I want us to win. And I'm urging the Prime Minister to change course, to, with humility, reflect on what the voters are telling us, and change the plan and the way that he's communicating and leading us.
If it's that dire, why not change the leader?
Listen, I just don't think that's a feasible prospect right now. We don't have enough time, and it's impossible for anyone new to come and change our fortunes, to be honest. There's no Superman or Superwoman out there who can do it. Rishi Sunak has been leading us for about 18 months. He's been making these decisions. These are the consequences of those decisions. He needs to own this, and therefore he needs to fix it.
You know, despite Suella Braverman saying Rishi Sunak should govern more in the way that Suella Braverman would, and Paul Scully saying the Conservatives should be more optimistic, and so on and so on. I think if there were an easy answer, at least as Rishi Sunak perceives it, to getting the Conservative Party out of the doldrums, then he'd have gone for it by now. His view has always been that the best route to Conservative salvation, or at least a less bad defeat, is an improving economy. And the economy is improving. The economy has improved since last year's local elections. And if you look at the PNS, the Conservative Party isn't doing any better. So the Conservatives just have to, I think, hang tight and hope that the next few months of economic improvement might be the months of economic improvement which improve their poll ratings.
Okay.
But I think that would be a triumph of hope over expectation.
Well, the thing is that we've got to remember that Suella Braverman backed Rishi Sunak. So in the psychodrama of the Tory leadership campaign, which we've discussed here before, if you're Labour, you keep reminding the voter that this is the party of Liz Truss, Partygate and everything gate, and that's kind of what they should be doing, say the strategists. So how can Suella Braverman say her guy's the wrong guy?
Well, I asked her that question, and what she said this morning, did she regret bashing Did she regret bashing Rishi Sunak? She's doing that now. Did she regret backing him? Have a listen.
Honestly, yes, I do. Because I had assurances from Rishi Sunak that he was going to put a cap on legal migration, that he was going to do something about the European Convention on Human Rights, that he was going to fix this transgender ideology in our schools. He hasn't done that. I want our party to win. I want us to beat this feeble Labour Party, and I want to save our country from Keir Starmer. I'm not going to give up. I'm still going to fight, even if it makes me unpopular. I'm going to speak the truth, because that's what the 400 councillors who we lost this week deserve. That's what the authorities that we lost this week deserve. We are not going to fix this problem unless we're honest about it and we change course in reflection with some humility to what the voters are telling us.
And here's the problem, I think, for Rishi Sunak's loyal lieutenants, that you've got people on both sides of the Tory party saying you've got to have some humility, you've got to take a breath, you've got to think why this isn't working. And there's no sign of that at all. So Mark Harper, very loyal, just sat there and said, stick with the plan, this is what the country wants. This is how he had to describe it.
It's all to play for. The election isn't a foregone conclusion, and you shouldn't take the voters for granted.
You're saying it's all to play for.
So it's all to play for.
All of these councillors around the country, you've lost everything apart from the mayoral election results.
Yes, I think the national equivalent vote share, the analysis that's been done by Rawlings and Thrasher and that thing there showed that it's closer than the national polls. You shouldn't take the voters for granted. It's everything to fight for. There's a lot to do. I absolutely acknowledge that. Henry,
What about questions for Labour? I think we could go on forever seeing the Conservative Party vote analysed with someone saying it's all to play for. But is, A, Keir Starmer charismatic enough? B, will they have to change their policy on Gaza? And C, does it matter? Is it all now? Does this election confirm that they're on course to win?
It definitely confirms that as things stand, they're on course to win. Yeah, I mean, there are clouds on the horizon, for sure. You know, both the issues they've had in places with high numbers of Muslim voters, but also some urban, more left-wing areas where they're losing votes to the Green. By the way, those areas sometimes overlap, so it's quite hard to know precisely why people are turning against them. But, you know, sure, those are problems that might potentially afflict a Starmer government, which, as it stands, looks like it would have a fairly convincing majority. But they are nice problems to have if it looks like you're on course for a majority 5 years after such a bad electoral defeat. I mean, I think one thing really worth noting is what appears to be the efficiency of the Labour vote. Let me explain what I mean there. Basically, they are piling on votes in places where they really need to, places where they were previously quite unpopular, places which will determine a general election, Thurrock, Redditch, so on.
Yeah, and
where they are losing votes is the places where they're already extremely strong, constituency Westminster level. So even if they lose a ward at council level, they've got votes to lose and they can still keep those seats. And I'll just give you one brief historical parallel because I'm a nerd. The 2005 general election, Tony Blair won a 66-seat majority, the sort that Keir Starmer would kill for. They only beat Michael Howard's Conservatives in share of the vote nationally by 2.8 percentage points. So when you look at Conservatives saying, oh, well, Labour only 9 points ahead on projected national share, even with a vast, independent and Green vote, which wouldn't happen at a general election. Well, actually, in some scenarios, if the vote is efficiently distributed on the first past the post, you could be winning by a lot less than that and still end up with a big majority in the House of Commons.
I mean, I don't think that is nerdy, and I think you've got to look at the machinery of our general election politics in order not to make a simple read across from the local election politics, because all of our listeners in Scotland didn't have this election, all of our listeners in Northern Ireland didn't have this election, and all of our listeners in Wales only elected police and crime commissioners. So they do not want us saying, I know what will happen in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Inverness.
Absolutely. And these results don't prove anything. They show trends, right? They confirm the big headlines that the Tories are in really deep trouble and that Labour is on the march. That's about it. Now, there are all sorts of other micro things that are really interesting, but in terms of what you can confidently conclude from this, you have to say, hold your horses. And I say it every week, and I know it's really boring, but campaigns do change things, and the election is miles away. But Labour does have a problem, though, with that part of the electoral bloc at the moment because of the leadership's position on Gaza and Israel. That is a real problem. And you were talking to Tracey Brabin, the re-elected, jubilant mayor of West Yorkshire.
Yes, she got a stonking victory over the Conservative who came second. She admitted, yes, international politics is playing through to our domestic politics and Labour needs to listen and come up with a clear response. Here's what she told us.
But you can't sugarcoat that. I've been door knocking for weeks now. And before I became mayor, I was the Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen. And I know that international politics really do impact on communities and particularly the Muslim community. And they were hurt. But I was really pleased to see that in the West Midlands, Keir was saying, you know, we've heard you and we're listening. And as the first mayor to call for a ceasefire here in West Yorkshire, I know that this was really important for so many, and not just, actually, quite frankly, the Muslim community. Many people were despairing at what they were seeing and wanted to see that leadership. But I do think that Labour are in the right position, and David Lamb is really led from the front here.
How interesting, though, that she managed to slip in there. I was one of the first mayors to call for a ceasefire. Now, that's true, she was, but the mayors took a different position to the national leadership.
Yeah, because isn't it the case, Henry, that there's been a boost for incumbent mayors and also the personal politics can trump the party politics, witness Houchin in Teesside?
This is the point of mayoralties, right? This is the point of these powerful local mayors sprawling across different local authorities, combined authorities as they're called. You know, this is why they were invented, mostly by George Osborne and the David Cameron government in the mid-2010s, though the London mayor dates back to 2000, of course. You know, they were designed to sort of sit out with national politics. And I think on the one hand, this set of results shows that they do, because they all have their own particular strengths and weaknesses. They all, of course, you know, are making profound decisions for people's lives in the combined authorities that they govern. On the other hand, if you take a step back now that we've got all the results, you know, these powerful mayors designed to sit outside party politics in some sense, and yet all but one of them are now Labour. And including York and North Yorkshire, right? I mean, including Rishi Sunak's own patch. And I think that does tell quite a strong story, given that, you know, perhaps at the start of this weekend, we thought that the West Midlands and the Tees Valley would be sort of Tory holdouts. I think most people thought that York and North Yorkshire would be Conservative as well. Yeah, actually, that is a vast swathe of this country's cities and broader regions, which are going to be governed by Labour Party politicians.
And that's going to happen, whatever happens in the general election. They're going to be in their jobs for the next 4 years, and that will have a big impact on the communities around the country. What's interesting, though, is what happens next for, I mean, both the big parties, but we've talked a lot about the Tories and their nightmare in the last couple of days. I think what's also interesting, where do Labour go next? When are they going to start giving more clarity on things like their policy on immigration? We asked Pat McFadden about that this morning. Answer came there, none, although he did say that if they win, and there have been migrants who have gone to Rwanda, they will not bring them back. So he did say that they would stop the scheme, but he wouldn't say they would bring people back. which was a specific question that we wanted to know the answer to. But we've had an email from someone who calls himself an interested voter. That's a great email address. Wanting to know, at what point will any representative of the Labour Party actually say what they're going to do? Instead of relying on how disastrous the Tories are, I'd be very interested to know exactly what Labour are intending to do with our country that's going to be better than what we currently have. And it made me think, hearing that, about the pressure that they're going to come under. The Tories may not be able to, who knows, but they may not be able to close the gap between them and the Labour Party very much. What they can, though, do, and what they're quite good at doing, is rattle the Labour Party. They can panic them. They can upset them. They can come up with things like put pressure on the 28 billion, or they can go after Angela Rayner, and they can rattle the Labour Party's cage just at a moment when Labour, I think, is starting to see themselves as winners, because Labour doesn't have an easy time seeing themselves in that way because they've lost so many times. But the Tories are good at rattling them, and that is what they will do. And it's going to be really interesting to see, does this set of results actually show us a different, much more confident, more nimble, maybe more aggressive Labour Party? I don't know.
And I can just on the rattle theme, Reform will rattle the Conservative Party.
Yep.
Because they're going to stand in all the seats at the general, which they did not do at the locals. And the Liberal Democrats produced more councillors than the Conservatives did this time round. The Greens made advances. So you've got, Henry, you've got a sort of division of our politics. Are we listening as newscasters and we're broadly left? Are we listening and we're broadly right? There's going to have to be a realignment by the time of the general election, isn't there? Because people will vote differently. But do you feel that the guest who came on Radio 4 said to us today, Keir Starmer can afford to forget reform. They're not coming for voters from Labour like UKIP did. This is a Conservative problem, not like UKIP, who also took Labour voters.
I think that seems to be the case. From the places where reform stood this time round and has stood previously, it's not a UKIP level phenomenon in taking votes from Labour. You know, in hindsight, UKIP was a sort of early harbinger of what was happening with Brexit.
It's a gateway, wasn't it?
Labour, exactly. But reform is something a bit different. It does seem to be siphoning votes primarily from the Conservatives, although, you know, still not probably siphoning votes in the quantity you'd expect if the national polls about where reform were correct. I mean, I think you're right to mention all the other parties as well, Paddy, because one reason that the Labour share in the projected national share and the Tory share as well both look quite low in historical terms is because lots more people are using these elections to vote for parties beyond those two main parties. And I think that probably does speak to major levels of dissatisfaction with UK politics, with party politics, with who the parties are producing and offering to them. And I do think that's a little, if it doesn't sound too pompous, for British parliamentary democracy, I think that is a warning light flashing on the dashboard. Because, you know, as you said at the start of this, Paddy, I think Gavin Barr said on your programme, you know, Keir Starmer is not exciting people in the way that Tony Blair did. And that's clearly true. On the other hand, he is significantly more popular or less unpopular than Rishi Sunak. It's just they're all so much less popular than politicians were in the noughties, in the 90s, in the 80s. Generally, if you look at approval ratings of leaders, there's a trend for all of them, whoever they are, that's just going down and down and down. I don't know what that says about our society. I don't know what it says about our politics, but I'm pretty confident it's not healthy and it's not good.
We should share that Suella Braverman, talking about lack of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer, that you said Gavin Barr said he's no Blair. Suella Braverman claimed that Keir Starmer had the charisma of a peanut.
We are not delivering for the people. We're not delivering the policies that people want. And it's a disgrace that we are trailing up against Labour, led by Keir Starmer, who has the charisma of a peanut.
It's probably the most memorable phrase that was used between 9 and 10 on BBC One. I just say also it's worth mentioning that in local elections, people do tend to flirt a bit more with the other parties. And what you also often see is that you get to a general, actually people do go back to the, am I going to go red or am I going to go blue? But, you know, we'll see. I just want to mention one other thing I think is really interesting that keys into one of the things I'm intrigued to see in the next couple of months about how Labour evolves. When do they start to tell us more on policy, but also do they start to look different? Has anybody noticed what Keir Starmer has done again and again and again in the last couple of days when they've won?
Well, are you going to tell me that he appears at football grounds?
Yes, but non-league football grounds. So not in a shirt and tie, not in a suit and tie, not in a shiny floor factory in front of a big widget or a plane with people with really stiff placards all standing there ready to clap on cue when he walks in. He's gone to non-league football grounds in that centrist dad uniform, a bomber jacket, navy shirt, or even a V-neck jumper with a T-shirt underneath it. Exactly. He's been in Paddy's wardrobe. He's been rifling through.
So he goes to non-league football grounds, and then that means he's got more feeling of spontaneity?
I'm a man of the people. Look at me. I love nothing more than playing a five-a-side with my mates. And if I wasn't trying to be Prime Minister, I'd just be here having a pint and maybe kicking a ball around. And it is a completely different vibe to the kind of very staged photo ops that we see so often, used to see from Labour politicians so often.
The Edstone.
Oh, God, I forgot about the Edstone. But that, to me, and I asked someone in the party about it, I said, are you doing that on purpose? And this is an absolutely deliberate decision that they've taken, is to send him to non-league football grounds. Maybe he's trying to be mates with the two lovely American film stars who have got Wrexham. Who knows? Maybe he'll pop up there and there'll be a Netflix, Starmer, the Wrexham manager. But it's deliberate. And it's really interesting to me. And they've clocked onto this sort of, it's a kind of softer image, isn't it, of him? Because people sometimes say he looks boring. Put them in a home environment where he obviously does look much more comfortable. And it's just really interesting to me because I'm sad enough to notice these things.
Henry's nodding because also you've got...
a good point. It's such a good point because it speaks to two things. One is Starmer's love of football, which is basically the only facet of his personality beyond politics that is presented to the public. And, he does interviews on football radio stations. He was on Talk Sport. He did a really niche football podcast called Football Cliches, which I listened to, but I was quite surprised when Keir Starmer popped into my feed maybe a year or so ago. I'd also note, though, that the fact they're non-league football grounds, as well as speaking to what Labour want to portray him as, speaks to the electoral geography of Labour support, because
it's a town strategy.
If they were just getting votes in cities, they're not non-league football clubs there. They're generally Premier League or Championship football clubs.
And there's no point, Keir Starmer.
The sort of towns where they're winning, their football clubs are generally lower league or non-league football.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a risk here because, some of the most florid language I've ever heard has been when I've gone to football matches. I've heard words I didn't even know could be made rude at football matches. And if you're, if you put me there, I'd be quite sure I'd attract a lot of opprobrium. Just on what they're all doing, Rishi Sunak's constantly in a hard hat at a factory. Ed Davies, these stunts, I've earlier pointed out to our listeners who love the Liberal Democrats, they got more councillors than the Conservatives
they did.
But do we feel it's over for the stunt? Have we seen enough?
Oh, no, they love it. He loves it. But also the thing is that they know it will get them pictures in the papers and on the news, right? So this is not just because Ed Davey likes having a day out and playing with an inflatable dinosaur. It's also because they know it gets them on the news and it creates a moment. And look, what have they achieved? We're talking about it. And there's the fourth party actually currently, that is a tick in the column. But on that, they told me recently, actually, they don't tell Ed Davey until he's almost there. So he doesn't know what the stunt's going to be. So it's a big surprise for him.
But just something that when we launched the weekend edition, we started saying, look, in this campaign, look for interviews outside the normal.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't say that. But to hear that he's doing these podcasts, because I didn't listen to that podcast.
Oh, Keir Starmer.
Yeah. Can we say that's a takeaway in this election campaign we now know we're in? Do we see interviews in more interesting locations? Do we see soft interviews? Do we see surprising interviewers?
We're going to see the lot. And we saw recently the PM and his wife did an interview with Grazia where he revealed to the nation how much he likes to be in charge of how the dishwasher is stacked and making sure that she's made the bed correctly. But that's another. But we're going to see the lot, and in our wonderfully diverse media landscape that we're in now, right? We're going to see the lot. And actually, interestingly, recently the Prime Minister even had in some Instagram influencers and did chats with them that were oh so natural that went on Instagram about personal finances and things like that. So I think all the parties are going to be using any outlet, platform, whatever they can, to try to get the message across.
Shall we do final words? What do you want to say that you haven't? Shall I go first?
Oh, goodness me. What do I want to say that I haven't said already? Paddy will be here till the rest of the week.
You can think that while I'm saying it. Tone and turnout. It was notable that Richard Parker praised Andy Street and that Andy Street took it like a man and said it's my fault. British politics, people need to learn to disagree better, I feel. I would say that. And turnout was broadly speaking low, and that means that it's harder to make sensible comparisons. So I would add that from my perch.
Henry?
Well, picking up on what Paddy just said, what does Andy Street do next? Does Andy Street want to stay in politics, but faster than waiting 4 years to take on Richard Parker for the West Midlands mayoralty? I genuinely don't know the answer to this. I'm merely speculating. But Solihull, which is a safe Conservative seat within the West Midlands Combined Authority, currently doesn't have a Conservative candidate. And I'm sure there are lots of Conservatives, particularly on Andy Street's more One Nation wing of the party, who will be saying to him, Andy, go for Solihull, come into the House of Commons and be a big player in the Conservative Party rebuild if they lose that general election.
I think it's a really good shout. Even before that, though, I wonder if Andy Street might feel he wants to unburden himself a bit more than he did last night. And of course, there's a warm seat waiting on that sofa or that chair if he wishes to do so. I've got some red chairs downstairs. Paddy, you've got some grey chairs.
I think probably beige.
Beige, it would be beige. Nothing beige about Broadcasting House, Paddy. Yeah, that's a really interesting shout. Yes, I think actually I'm all out of words.
OK, it's fine.
Mercifully.
So we say goodbye, really. I think that's the point, isn't it?
Thank you very much for being with us today.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Newscast from the BBC.